I want to talk to you guys about my analysis of what's going on with Hyper. So just taking a quick brief look down, we started to see the Hyper buy and burn when the vortex was activated. And basically, when that started to come into play, we started to see some interesting price appreciation of Hyper. Actually, no, let me back up. So, just starting off with the launch of Hyper, we had a bunch of miners launched between, let me get rid of this. I believe that was March 8th all the way to about right around March 21st. And then we had this massive down period. And this was from Mike Dean's was it the TitanX hub? It's a premium count. So with the inflation coming out, that all came out on day 88. So a bunch of it was minted out. On day 98, we had the hyper burn. Well, I mean, the hyper burn vortex come into play. And there was right around, I believe it was $500,000 worth of TitanX being used to burn hyper. So what that did was we had a small amount of supply coming out and we didn't have much hyperinflation coming in. So hyper was just getting burnt. Now, this created this flywheel effect that Jake was talking about. And if we just come over here to the hyper miner, right now, the estimated miner ROI is sitting at about 84%. And so that means that a bunch of TitanX is being used to burn miner and start to bring these miners into profitability. So while that was happening, on top of that, we started to see more. Can you hear me? You good to go?
Yeah, but it's robotic on my end. Wait, I'll try rejoining with a different proxy. 1 second.
Okay, gotcha. Sounds good. So basically, once these miners start to come into profitability, people are like, okay, hyper miners are profitable. So what's the next best thing? I'm gonna go and create a miner to make more hyper because you can get a sustainable ROI. So what this actually did was if you come over to the buy and burn and you create a hyper miner, a certain portion of that creation of that hyper miner comes in to buy TitanX. And basically what that created was a massive amount, well, about 88 Ethereum that's being used to just buy TitanX off the market. So what that initiated is basically the increase in the price floor of TitanX, and that's why TitanX was going up so slowly, was because Hyper was the entry. On top of that, we also have TitanX projects like Blaze, Helios, Dragon X, Inferno, Jake X, Baby Dragon X. Those started to come into play and started to increase volume on the network. So overall, man, it was a positive flywheel. It created an awesome network effect. And in my opinion, this is the main reason why we're starting to see the price appreciation of TitanX. Do I still sound robotic, or are we good to go, man?
I think it's good now. I think we're
Okay,
good.
cool. Awesome. Yeah. So just a total rundown. I was talking about how the hyper miners came into profit and that caused more and more people to go in and say, hey, I want to mint some more hyper because we didn't have that much supply coming out after that day 88 time frame. And what that initiated was a bunch of Ethereum going to the buy TitanX, which caused a increase in the overall TitanX ecosystem price floor. So first thing I want to say is, hey, kudos to you, man. I think it was absolutely awesome. And the second thing I want to ask you, did you have this planned out or was it a little bit of a surprise?
Oh, this was planned out.
Was
Yeah,
this
and
planned
also,
out? Okay.
oh yeah, for sure. Because day 88 was you had this big supply come out. It's less of a big community than TitanX, so you have less whales protecting the price. Hyper also needed time to prove itself, and then I think the main cool thing about Hyper is the vortex triggering on day 196, which is roughly September 16, which just so happens to be when the last mediocre supply spike is. So Hyper could be a big reason why TitanX also goes into hyperdeflation. And that was always the design intent of Hyper. Because whatever happens at Hyper, whatever action people take, either it's buying Hyper on market, it pushes up the TitanX price because it's only liquidity pair. So people have to buy TitanX first and then Hyper. When they mine, it kind of takes that buy anyway, because the Ethereum goes and buys TitanX, burns 20%, buys Hyper, burns. It's just this cool flywheel on the side of TitanX. One, it gives users a great deal because they can compound. And two, it creates the same effect as it actually creates a better effect because now the TitanX gets locked up in the Hyper, buy and burn smart contracts, and slowly gets injected into the liquidity pool to the buy and burn. And the second part is the Ethereum buys TitanX, burns 20%. So instead of a user holding the supply and then just trading it and dumping it, you now have a smart contract, hold the supply, burn 20% of TitanX. So it's this super powerful flywheel on top of TitanX. I like it. It's good.
I love
And
it.
then the vortex timing.
Hey man,
Yes.
that was clever, man. That was clever. I remember you messed you about that. And when I put the math together, I was like, bro, that was a pretty good chess move. Loved it. And I think the key to understanding this was the fact that you use Ethereum to start the miners. That's what's actually really creating that flywheel effect on top of TitanX. And in my opinion, I know you can't speculate on price because you are a founder, but I can. And I firmly believe that Hyper will bring TitanX miners to profitability. And when that happens, then we'll get close to the deflationary phase. Now, speaking of the deflationary phase of TitanX, I'm curious to know your thoughts. What are some indicators that TitanX is going deflationary besides the massive like price increase? Because that will probably be the clear sign. But is there any other indicators that you're looking at to indicate that TitanX is going massively deflationary?
Yeah, every day on app.titanx.win/stats, the stats page, I look at it every day and I track it in a Google sheet. And for example, before day 280, we had 7 days in a row where we were already deflationary, even with all the supply coming out, which is kind of wild. So the supply does need to stop coming out before it becomes deflationary. Like I think it was in the period. I have my sheet here. What is it? It was just before day 280. We had 6 days in a row where the supply was deflationary, meaning that liquid supply was going down for 6 days straight, which is reflected in the price chart. Yeah, obviously I cannot talk about price. I know never financial advice, but there's two options. Either all the protocols work so well that it burns more than whatever the inflation is that is coming out from miners that users started, or no supply comes out, and then all of the burning that happens from all these protocols is just net burning, makes it deflationary, forces it to be deflationary. There's a bunch of routes it can take. The hyper-deflationary will start once all the supply is out, which is roughly at the end of September. Like September, you see a little spike now on Mike Jean's Dune Analytics, but that's absolutely nothing compared to day 280. It's very, very negligible. And if you see how strong TitanX was during day 280, it shouldn't even be on your mind. But yeah, I think after September, we officially enter hyperdeflation. Now we're going to have like small pockets of deflationary, but not hyperdeflationary. But then once all the miners are out, that's when you go hyperdeflationary. So hyperinflationary to hyperdeflationary, and that's roughly around historically where all the altcoin seasons happen.
Right. I love it, man. Great analysis. And this is just my thoughts on what I'm looking at from my perspective is, so we got 915, and then I believe the Vortex launch was, you said 916 or 919. Well, somewhere in that time frame. But it's going to happen shortly after that. So when we have the Vortex release, and then we have day 369, which I believe is going to be right around Halloween or November 1st to the 2nd, somewhere in that time frame.
Calculate it.
I remember I wrote this all down, but long story short, within that, I'll say a 1 week time frame, you got the first catalyst with what we're starting to see with the Vortex. And then when we hit day 369, the two protocols that I'm looking at specifically is going to be Helios and then Dragon X, because they have a benevolent TitanX whale staker. It's going to be coming in and it's going to be benefiting the system. And by day 369, you're going to have a majority of the supply out on the market. And then once that hits, that's when I believe we're going to see the fireworks. So in my opinion, somewhere between the Vortex release and day 369, we'll see signs of deflationary. And then when it goes hyper deflationary, it's going to happen so quickly. You're going to barely, it's going to be